What is good, Tsla family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I want to break down what's going on with Tesla, SPY, Nvidia, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down what's happening to the economic calendar thus far, what you should be watching for when it comes to the very important earnings coming out, and some very important levels for all these different tickers, which I will discuss a little bit later. But before I begin into all this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo and deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed up to 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed up to 15 free stocks, and the offer ends very soon. Anyways, now let's break down what's going on with the market. In my previous video, I mentioned the market had more upside potential, and as you can see, SPY technically pushed up higher, and we closed above the highs we made from Friday. So the market did push up a bit higher, so did the QQQ temporarily. Some stocks like Tesla were very, very weak as we had so much bad news that came out. And Nvidia and Aapl, these things ended up meeting our targets. We got 195 on Aapl as predicted. We saw Nvidia reach 600 as predicted right before it came back down just a bit. So the question is, what is the market likely going to do from here? What do I see panning out? And what is some of the most important pieces of data to be watching for? I'll be going over all of this very, very quickly. So I just want to mention that for tomorrow's going to be Tuesday. We have some data coming out at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have the Richmond Fed Manufacturing Index and the services data. Now, this data is going to be very important, at least for the markets, because there's a lot of things going on when it comes to shipments and current supply right now, right? We know there's a lot of violence going on at the Red Sea. We're seeing a lot of shipping routes being rerouted, and we're seeing a lot of new changes being made. This is going to have a big effect on supply chains and possibly even inflationary data. So it's very important to pay very close attention to this. We'll be watching the manufacturing numbers and shipments tomorrow at 10 a.m., 30 minutes after the market opens at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, by the way. So that's going to be important. Watch for volatility in the stock market at this time, and we'll see how the numbers end up affecting the markets. After that, at 11:30 a.m., we have the 52-week bill auction coming out, which is kind of minor, and the 2-year note auction at 1:30 p.m. We could see some volatility at those times, but it's going to be very minor. The most important time is going to be 10 o'clock a.m. Watch the data very carefully. Besides that, earnings for United are still coming out at the time I'm recording this, not to mention a couple of others. And then when it comes to other pieces of data, I just want to mention that we have Verizon before market open, and then General Electric. And then after market close for Tuesday, we also have Netflix and just a couple of others. So watch those very carefully tomorrow, especially after market close. Millions will be watching Netflix earnings. That's going to be very interesting too. For Wednesday, it's going to be the most important day as we have Tesla and IBM announcing their earnings. Get ready for those. Tesla's going to be a big one. I'm very excited for that one as well. We'll see how it goes for them. Now, when it comes to other things in the market is still very greedy. We didn't reach extreme greed this time around. We were at extreme greed a month ago. Now we're just at greed right now. And we'll see if there are any changes that come forth. Now, I just want to mention that the earnings coming out could affect how the market moves as well, so we'll be watching those very carefully. Not to mention other pieces of data at the end of the week, as we have PCE data and GDP numbers. We'll watch and see if these can help the market become more greedy or not, but that's going to be more important later on during the week. On top of this, I just want to mention that market momentum is still at extreme greed. On top of this, don't forget that the put and call positioning is starting to drop a little bit. We're starting to see more puts being bought as the ratio is shifting downwards, which means that there's a big change that's kind of like developing right here, and we're starting to see a big shift in the overall sentiment. This is very important as we're starting to see more and more of those puts, coming back in. And we'll be watching to see how this ends up continuing as time goes on. But right now, the market is still quite greedy. This is still very, very important. We'll see how this continues. Market volatility, it's still quite neutral. We actually saw the VIX still very close to where it was previously, very close to where the 50-day moving average is. It's technically a little bit below it, but it's very, very flat right now. As the market's very flat. So we'll see if it bounces off the 50 moving average or not on the daily. I'll be watching that very carefully. Besides that, indicators are still at extremes. Most things are kind of flat as the market's flat, so we'll just have to see how it goes. The market also has a different view that is kind of approaching, especially for the month of March. You can see as time goes on, the market's anticipating that the Fed is just going to keep rates essentially the same even for the month of March now. So there's a very high probability that that's going to end up being the case. We'll have to wait and see how it goes, though. So that's going to be important for the March FOMC. For January, we're also expecting the Fed to keep rates the same. Besides that, the Dow Jones ended up actually reaching a new high, not to mention some bullish breadths out there, at least for the market. Despite these articles coming out, I want you guys to be very careful because there's some important developments. So on SPY, we're actually developing a head and shoulders like structure up here, but I'm going to be open minded and unbiased when I tell you about how this could pan out. So if you look at SPY right now, we're actually turning on the 4 hour. We're actually showing a little bit of weakness now. I'm saying this because, yes, we pushed up nicely, but I told you guys in the morning to watch 485. I also called this level out yesterday, right? I mentioned 485 would be our next target if we ended up breaking above 483. We reached 485, but then we rejected and we started to just chop and trade sideways from there. But when you zoom in, right, if you go on the 5 minutes time frame, you will notice that this is essentially resembling a head and shoulders like structure. It's kind of resembling it, which does suggest there's a risk of some downside to complete this gap fill below and also to reach other levels. So you want to be very careful just to be safe. But just to be safe, here's how I'm going to be going about this. Just because the market drops a few points, it does not mean the market's going to crash back down. It doesn't mean SPY is going to 450 straight. It could just be a little bit of a small retracement before it continues higher. Always have that in mind. So if I were to play this, I would be very patient and I would, if anything, I'd be open to taking profits kind of quickly, right? That's like the name of the game these days, especially when the market is so unpredictable and crazy. So that being said, be very careful in trying to trade this. You have to be very, very careful. So now how would I go about this? So basically, we have a pattern that is showing signs that the market is turning alongside other signals. However, here are the levels to watch for. If you're bullish and you think that, hey, it's not going to play out, and how would you basically go about this for a backup plan? The answer is watch 485. If we break 485 and we end up breaking these highs, SPY could turn back to bullish and start shooting for 486 and 487.5. If we're bullish, 485 has to break. If we're bearish, you want to see it basically lose 482.75 because our next target is 482. If we lose that, we could be heading all the way down back to about 480 towards this imbalance over here for a temporary pullback. But don't forget, the breakout area at 479.5 is going to be a key support to 480, so we'll be watching that very carefully as well if we do get that break to the downside. So how is this looking right now? Looking at momentum, does favor the bears a little bit more. Not saying it's a crash, it's just a temporary, little pullback by a few points. It's a real possibility that could be coming, but we have to see if this head and shoulders plays out. Don't just short for no reason just because you're seeing this video. All you have to do is watch for confirmation. Watch to see if we break these levels this low right here just for confirmation before you make any trades. Non-financial advice is just a little hint I like to give, just based off like what I would do if anything. So with that being said, this favors the bears a little bit more. A little bit more. There might be a little pullback. That the odds of that is a little bit higher. But just to be safe, make sure you watch your levels. If we somehow get good news and this thing breaks 485, we'll turn back to bullish. I don't think that's probable, but it's still a possibility. So be very careful. This does favor the downside a little bit more. What about on the QQQ? Same thing, guys. QQQ is looking weaker. I called this gap getting filled today. It actually panned out. If you look at the QQQ right here, I mentioned to you all that this thing is turning, and it's starting to turn right now. We're about to get a bearish cross in the PPO on the 4 hour. We're also approaching 420 as a key level. If we lose that, we could be coming down to 418, then 416.72 at the 20 EMA on the 4 hour time frame. Where do I see this thing going? Here's the answer, okay? If you're bullish, you want to see this thing get above 422.5. Then if it breaks above that resistance, starts pushing up higher, there is potential for it to get back into the 424s. If you're bearish, you want to see this thing basically lose the low we made from today, so this like 421 area. If we lose that, 420 is our last point of hope, because if we lose 420, a much bigger drop is coming to 418, then potentially even the 416s. That's going to be our 20 EMA test on the 4 hour time frame. So there's going to be a bigger drop if we lose 420. That's going to be a very important support. Let me actually change this up because I had this in a different context before. Let me just change this up for a second. So I'll be watching this level up here, this blue line right here. I'll be watching this as a critical support. If we lose this, we'll be sinking. So I went over the bullish case and the bearish case, but the question is which one is more probable? The answer is the bearish case looks a little bit more imminent, considering the fact that this thing has a potential bearish wedge forming right here. So I do favor the downside a little bit more for a temporary pullback. Not saying it's going to crash. It could just drop a few points temporarily. It's a real possibility. Let's talk about Tesla before I break down the others. So Tesla had potential to push up because historically, as we approach earnings, we typically try to bounce. We saw an attempt to bounce here as it grabbed liquidity. However, it failed because we had so much bad news. Lots of bad news for Tesla that came out today. Okay, we had analysts downgrading Tesla. We had news about the Panasonic factory, which is going to be delayed, which is bad for their battery production. And we just had so many negative headlines. So unfortunately, Tesla is still technically downtrending. We're making lower highs and lower lows. But the lower we go, the more support's trying to hold it up. So it's not dropping as big of a rate, if anything. So I would say watch the 207s on Tesla, see if we can try to hold this. If you lose this, there's 205. Historically, that's a big support for Tesla. If you lose 205, we're going to likely come all the way down to 202 to 200 for a bigger drop. Those are basically your supports. For resistance, you're going to be watching this 210 zone. If we break above this, 212 is critical resistance. If you get above that, we could push back up to 216, break that, and I think 220 could be coming. But for now, I'd be very, very careful with trying to trade Tesla because this favors the bears now. This favors the bears. We're making a lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. It is still continuing to downtrend. What else is worth noting is that I was looking at the chart and I noticed that if you look at the 4-hour time frame on the daily time frame, not the daily, sorry, the 4-hour on Tesla, excuse me, we have this resistance at the 20 EMA. We keep touching this, rejecting, touching it, rejecting, touching it, rejecting. We're really struggling to break that, and that's going to be our key resistance at 213. So for tomorrow, there could be another liquidity grab. We might see Tesla try to push it for like 213, just like how we quickly popped when we opened, then come back down and start sinking back down to 207, if not even 205, and then just trade sideways after that. That's my prediction. A pop and drop, and then sideways choppy price action, and we might see another weak flat day for Tesla because there's so much bad news that keeps coming out. Tesla's struggling, if anything. So watch it very carefully when it comes to those levels and such. On Nvidia, Nvidia is looking like it might actually retrace a bit, but just to be safe, let's see if it loses the range. So on Nvidia, basically what happened was this thing reached 600. Now, there are people who are saying 620 could be coming, right? There's no resistance until then, right? That's completely fine if you thought that, but the truth is you have to be watching these other levels because look what Nvidia did. It pushed up to 600, hit 602, then it kind of rejected. Now it's trying to turn just a little bit. So where do I think it's going to go? We reached 600. This is going to be a psychological level, which is starting to act as resistance. On the 4-hour time frame, this is starting to curl a little bit. It's looking like it might actually retrace a bit, and this might drag the QQQ down because we have an imbalance around 589, which suggests there might be a small move to the downside coming. So if you want to be bullish, you want to see this thing break out and try to hold and close above 600. If that happens, watch 602, 605, and then eventually 607 to 610. If you're bearish, you want to see it basically lose 595. If it loses that, 592 is coming next alongside 590. If that fails us, 587 is next. That's a little bit close to our imbalance. What do I think is more probable? The answer is this might actually pop when we open, hit this imbalance up here, and then come back down and start just trading sideways. Sink back down and trade sideways. Might get a slight red day on Nvidia. May close just under 595 for a slight red day. Now, on Aapl, this is going to be very tricky because here's the thing about Aapl. I mentioned to you all we had a big George W, right? Our target was 195. So if you look at Aapl right here, let me show you this. Let me close my lines just to show you what this would look like. See this big George W? That's what my friends would refer to this as, right? Nice, right? But here's the problem. What happened when this thing hit 195 in the past, right? We rejected. So right here, there's this tight resistance. We rejected off 195, rejected very close to 195. Even right here, we got 3 rejections. So 3 rejections very close to 195. All right, what's the big deal? We reached that level today, and we're kind of struggling to break that. So we have some tight resistance on Aapl that's approaching. So you want to be very careful here. If we're bullish, we have to break 195. If we break it, 197 is next, and 200. If we're bearish, you want to see it basically lose 193.5. We lose that and fail to hold above that. I'm sorry, 192.5 is going to be the key level. If we lose 193.5, watch 192.5. If that fails us, a bigger drop is coming all the way down to fill this gap below, all the way back down to 190, if not 188. What do I think is more probable? Well, it depends on how it reacts to 195. I'll be watching that first. There is a risk of it rejecting, though, so just be a little bit careful for this temporary rejection. On the VIX, I want to mention that the VIX, it's been dropping quite a bit. It hasn't fully filled this gap yet, but here's the thing about the VIX. It doesn't always move like how it normally does. Could this thing drop to fill the gap, or is this thing going to rebound just a little bit before it continues lower? So we'll be watching this as well on the VIX. Still looks bearish, though. It suggests that there could be more upside for the markets in the future. It's just that looking at the market, it looks like there might be a temporary move to the downside, just temporarily, before we may continue higher later on. The VIX still suggests that there's more momentum left. Besides that, guys, I think I went over the majority of the tickers out. I'll just be going over a few others just for the last 5 minutes. So if you look at SoFi was up big, especially thanks to some nice banking news. I would say that we're going to be watching this resistance at 8. Break this, there's going to be 8.32. If it breaks above that, 8.67 is next. And if we break above that, we could basically push up to $9, right? That's what I'm seeing for SoFi. Those are some of your levels. I think the 4-hour 200 EMA could be tested. For support, make sure you watch 771. If that fails, we're going to be coming all the way down towards 7.21, basically. Sorry, 7.5, then 7.21. So very tight levels here, but I do believe there's potential for this to get closer to 8.32. This looks bullish, so look for a little push attempt on SoFi. For Rivian, for those who are interested, this is actually trying to curl here. Gonna be watching this resistance at the 20 EMA. If we could break 6.26, watch for a push all the way up to 17. If we fail to do so, it's going to reject back down. So watch this test of 16.26. There is potential for this to have upside. For the Russell 2000, nice breakout. This is what I was thinking would happen. It's actually looking stronger than the market, but watch resistance around 197. We have a triple rejection off 197, so watch how it reacts up here. It can push a little bit higher, but watch that resistance. It might start shopping up here. It could even reject, so watch that. If it breaks the 197, so our next target is 200. If it rejects, it's going to come back down. For Microsoft, it tried to push up higher, right? We called 400 that was coming. It actually reached 401 before it started to sink. Now it's testing 394. I think it's going to test 394 again. If it loses this, it's going to be sinking back down to 388. If it holds this, it might just chop around. So I think it might chop around, or maybe if it loses that support, it'll drop. I think that's very probable for Microsoft. It is looking a little bit weaker. AMD got a little retracement, but is holding the 20 EMA. So it depends on if it holds this or not. If we lose 165.67, it's going to be dropping to 157. If we hold this, it could try to bounce and push back up towards this breakout area up here around the 170s. So in my opinion, AMD is looking a little bit bearish though. We have a bearish crossover in the PPO, but we have to watch for confirmation if we lose 165. It is looking like it's going to test that, so we'll see if it breaks or not. That's going to be key for it. For the VIX, we're kind of flat. We do have this gap to fill technically, so it does look bearish technically, but it might shop around a bit if the market does see some temporary downside. And later on, this thing could drop as the market bounces. So this does suggest there's more upside for the market in the future. Maybe the market's not going to do it immediately. Maybe it's going to cool off first before that move comes. The dollar index is starting to push again on the 4-hour time frame. If it manages to get back to 103.5, we're going to be looking for a bigger push. That could lead to a big change. On Coinbase, watch the 20 EMA around 128. If we break above this, we're going to be looking for a push all the way up towards 133. But in my opinion, with this very, very nice looking inverse head and shoulders like structure, going to be looking for a little push to the upside. There is a good possibility it's going to try, depending on if it can break the 20 EMA. So if it breaks this, we're going to be looking for a bigger push. If it fails to do so, it's going to chop a bit, but I think it could push. For Google, this is starting to turn bearish. It might test 146. If we lose this, 144 is next. This is looking a little bit more bearish temporarily, but we're going to be watching to see how it reacts to 146.38. That's our next target. We'll see how it reacts from there. For Amazon, very flat, a little bit more bearish looking. Watch 154. If we lose that, our next target is 153.09. Watch those levels. It's kind of tight right now, very, very tight price action. For 4 hours, it's just stuck within a tiny range. So it's a little hard to tell how low it's going to go, but watch this support at 154.33. If we lose that and we fail to break above that, a bigger drop could be coming. For Meta, we tried to break out. We were looking bullish right at first, but then we turned. So I think it's going to test 378. If we lose 378, I think a bigger drop is coming towards 370. If we hold 378, we're going to be fine. But this does look a little bit more bearish. 378 should be coming, and we could even break below that to lower levels if that breaks. That's it for this one, guys. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you guys have a great day. Please be very careful, especially for the Tesla investors and traders out there. Tesla's in a very critical state. With that being said, have a great day. And I'll see you guys very soon on the next one. Thank you and peace out.